So right now you can hear us.
Okay.
Here. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Mike, we call roll.
Bob Smith.
Here.
Jason Schaffner.
Here.
Linda Meyer.
Yes.
Michelle Lott.
Yes.
And Mandy Croft is excused.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a regular meeting of the Sidney City School Board for the purpose of conducting our member business. Tiffany, do we have any visitors?
Yes, with us tonight we have Brandy Irwin, who is going to be hired as one of our subs. So, Brandy, and then of course Brooke Gessler and myself.
Great. Do we have any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will stand as presented. Tiffany, do we have any public participation?
No, none.
Next up then will be our treasurer's report.
Okay, first item are our minutes, financial reports, and invoices paid. I'd like to request a motion to approve the minutes, financial reports, and invoices paid as presented.
Do I have a motion? Michelle and Linda.
Okay. I am honestly not going to spend much time on our reports for the month end, the year-to-date end for October. If you look at the revenues and read over that, when you get down actually to the total revenue summary, we've gone over the property taxes, there's no new collections there, but the overall revenues year-to-date, we are within $29,000 of our budget, so perfectly comfortable with that, obviously where we're at. And on the expenditure side, every line item, salaries and benefits, purchase services, supplies, and capital outlay are all performing better than what we're budgeted, and we are 5.62% under budget for all expenditures. So really nothing of any significance to discuss there, which is performing better from what we had originally budgeted to this point in the year.
Any questions? Mike, would you please call roll?
Locke.
Yes.
Meininger.
Yes.
Schaffner.
Yep.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries. And I actually need to mark that names. Okay. The next item is our 5-year forecast. Like a motion to approve the 5-year forecast as presented.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Jason?
Second.
Michelle?
And this is where I'll spend a little bit of time this evening on this. And you all in front of you have a packet. And I've given that to you so that we are all working from the same script. Tonight, there were a few changes that I made today as I kind of worked through the forecast again. It was primarily in the purchase services area of the forecast. That's really where the changes were that I made. Excuse me. The top page is the overall forecast that you have there. I'm going to move past that page and move on to the pages behind it. And what I've done for this time is taking what was our May forecast and making comparisons to it for the November forecast. You know, with the failure of the levy here this month, we are going to need to meet here in early December, and I think we're going to have some discussion of that after the end of the meeting as to when that will work for everyone, and make some decisions as to when we go back on the ballot, what that looks like, what things we need to do within the district before we come back and ask for voters to approve something again. So what I really wanted to do is cover what has changed since May to this November forecast, since we're in the month in which we have a required submission date. So if you remember, there's twice a year that we're required to submit it, November and May. So obviously, we'll update this again after we meet, talk about what our future is going to look like. And so I cannot guarantee it's going to look dramatically different than what I submit today, but until we have those discussions, I don't want to make any assumptions either on what it could look like. So, and I thought maybe this would be helpful this time, something a little different than what we've done before, but I thought visually this might be easier than me rattling off number comparisons. We will try a graphical comparison for this time, and you can give me some feedback then as to whether that helps, doesn't help, makes more sense. But I think right now, especially for this one, the trend of what the forecast looks like is probably more helpful than what the raw numbers are going to be telling you when the comparison is. So on our property tax collections, the blue columns are what the May forecast was presenting, and the orange, I guess those is the current forecast that we'll be submitting for this month. The forecast, one other thing, the forecast I'll be submitting right now is going to be for 21 through 25, okay? I have one slide at the end that kind of shows you what including the 20-year 2025 includes, but for comparative purposes, for what we submitted in May, I included last fiscal year 20, which was the year of that forecast. So what we had forecast in May from 20 through 24, you can see the trend in May was a little up and down. As I went back, May was the first time that I used the web-based software that the company we work with. They transitioned everything from Excel-based to a web-based, and there were some little nuances to it of how it functioned. They've changed it since then, that there were like 2 places in which you could make adjustments for things like property taxes, salaries, and benefits. And I think what I have here was there were some issues where I made adjustments in both places. And so the May probably wasn't really reflecting what it should have, honestly, which is an indicator of the blue, because we don't typically see that type of a variation in our property tax collections where they go down and they go up and those types of things. And so I believe that the November forecast much more accurately reflects our property tax collections. The one thing that in here that I included that causes the downward trend is our property tax collections not only include the traditional property taxes and the personal property that we show in those top 2 lines in our forecast, but also the rollback and homestead. They're actually part of the total collections that we get. We just get those from a different source, okay? So I thought to accurately reflect that, I roll all those together in this. But the one other item is that hold harmless payment. And if you recall, that's phasing out. So that's what you see reflected in 20, 21, 22. So at the end of 22, that's the last that we have any collections from the hold harmless payments. Beginning in 23, that is why you see the flat collections in those 2 years. 2025 reflects that same trend, just no new revenues in those particular line items once that goes away. Obviously, if we pass something next year, we will see that trend up. But for now, we're seeing the only change in our property collections is the loss of that home harmless as it phases out. So basically flat funding for the property tax collections. The next page is the state funding. So in fiscal year 2020, if you remember, we had $600,000 that we had lost initially from the reduction through our to the state foundation from the governor's office and the legislation that reduced everybody's funding. Our reduction is around $650,000. In 2021, in our initial forecast, not knowing where things were going, we had forecast an additional 600,000 or so to be a total of 1.3 million we thought was a possibility to lose this year. That did not happen. They maintained that same foundation funding that we received in 2020. Still 600,000 or so less than what we should have been receiving, but it didn't reduce any farther than that. 2022 reflects part of that coming back, and in 2023, we recognize all of our funding to come back from what it was originally in 2020. From there, at this point, we see nothing that would indicate a rise in our foundation formula. So 23, 24, and 25 all reflect flat funding. The one thing that could have some impact, but we're a long way from there, is the recent, you may have seen some of the recent articles on the new funding formula. And I sat through a webinar on that last week. Initially it sounds encouraging. I'm not overly confident because I have seen some of these come and go by the wayside. They never end up being what was originally proposed. On this one, and the key with this is once it's fully funded, in this new formula, once it would be fully funded, it would give us about $3.5 million more a year if it's fully funded. But even at that, their phase-in with this new funding formula is actually over 6 years. So that's got to make 2 biennial budgets after the budget gets passed in. I still see that as residual funding, if you will, because if there's money, if the money's not available in the budget, they can't fully fund it, which is why it's a phase-in to begin with. So we've got to go through 2 budgets besides the initial one it's passed in before we would even see that full funding. So while it could help, it's not going to be a short-term help for our funding situation. The next one, and those are primarily the revenue pieces that we have in place. There's some small miscellaneous revenue, but has very little impact on our overall budget. Then as we move into the expenditures on the salaries and benefits, in the May forecast, if you remember, that was had to be submitted prior to any of the reductions that we were beginning to discuss at that time, which is why you see the trend in the blue columns for May forecast. The November forecast reflects the change in salaries and benefits with the reductions that we made. So there's still a slight trend up, even though the total amount is less. And for budgeting purposes, just for your information, we need to put something in. I did put like a 1% increase after this year, just for demonstration purposes, really, so you can see what the impact is on that. But still, so we have less salaries and benefits beginning with this year primarily, and so our trend is less compared to the forecast in May. The next item is our purchase services. This is probably the most significant impact in this area that we've seen. And there's 2 areas that are driving this increase. So obviously again, the blue is where we're seeing as the May forecast. We were recognizing some level of trending up in our purchase services. We've seen that here the last couple of years with some additional special ed costs and those types of things. But in the November forecast, I have a general trend going up in most of the line items. Nothing real significant in any of them except what I have marked as 441, which is communications, and 478, which actually is community schools. So in the 441, the increase for our communications is all the T-Mobile hotspots that we have for remote learning and those types of things. So that costs us about $35,000 a year. The biggie though is the huge jump in our community school that we're seeing for this fiscal year. That's an increase of $285,000 over last year.
Would you explain that? What do you mean by community school? Is that for the,
Online, all the kids that are online learning that are not online learning with us,
Like the private ones,
the
like
private ones, right?
K-12, virtual academy.
okay, not layman holy, just the money
No,
that goes to
no.
it?
No, those don't get reflected in our budget. This is truly those, like would have been the ECOTs and those type of online learning programs.
How many students is that? 2.5?
Well, figure $6,000 per student. So,
So for any child that's online, we lose the 6,000?
correct, yes.
Not
Not our
our
own.
kids that are online with
Not ours.
us,
Okay,
just if they're going to a separate school,
okay.
outside the district.
Right. And so really, it's those two that are driving that difference from what we saw in May. And then the last of the expenses on the all other expenses, and this can fluctuate, and I'm just being somewhat conservative on this. It's the smaller of the dollars of the overall budget. But we're seeing a little bit of a trending increase in those areas too. But we're talking, we're only talking from 195 to about 2,150,000. So it's an increase, but something we just need to continue to watch as we go forward. So these last three charts kind of give you an overall sense. So the very first one was our cash balance with the passage of a levy. So in May, the blue line, it shows that in 2024, had we even passed it, we still would be close to zero. And if you remember, so if you push that out to 2025, even in May, we talked about we still would need to do something had we passed it. So the orange line, November, reflects our cash balance if we pass something in 2021. So collections would start in 2022. So we have the $3.5 million that we won't have collected this year, won't have collected in 2021. That transition between collecting in the calendar year and reflecting in the fiscal year. But we do have the benefit of some of the cost saving measures we put in place. But you can still see, again, it is a trending down pattern where even with the passage of a levy, we need to continue to look at areas where we can change our operations and make some savings going forward. The next one is what our cash balance looks like, if we did nothing, just no levy or anything of that nature. For the May forecast, you can see how much it had trailed off had we done nothing, well below, zero cash, which obviously isn't something you can do. And in the November forecast, with the same concept, our true cash balance without a levy shows us that in 2024, we are below zero. And when we look at the overall forecast, you'll see it's about $140,000 in the red if we don't pass anything and make no changes. And then finally, on the November forecast, to show you the entire years for that forecast, 2021 through 2025. So the November forecast with the levy, meaning we passed it in sometime in calendar year 2021, collections start in 2022, that by 2025, we're at zero. And if nothing happens, we're well below a cash balance of zero, which obviously we can't do. There's a whole lot of other things happening before you get there. So, just briefly, the forecast that you have in front of you If you go clear to the very bottom, line 15010, this reflects all the changes made between the May forecast and the November forecast that are reflected in the charts, and considers that we do pass something in 2021 at the same level that we looked at this time around. So still a 7.3 mil operating levy collecting $3.5 million. But Bill, that shows you that if you get out to 2025, it's a negative $149,000. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do yet ahead of us. And we'll begin that. Bob and I already started having some conversations, and then we'll do some more work to present to you guys when we meet in early December.
Why, I just don't understand, even with the levy, you say in 5 years, we're back down to zero again. What are we doing so wrong, or what are all the other schools doing so right that they're not constantly in this bad situation?
Well, it depends on what other schools you're talking about. I mean, there's a number of other schools that are similar to us that are consistently trying to, pass operating monies. One thing that I think you see here locally is everyone except us have an income tax. And that's the one item that when the economy's doing pretty well, as it has been the last several years, those collections increase. Ours are all property tax, so we're flat. We either, we're collecting at the same dollar amount year after year, and unless we had significant significant increases in new construction, let's say, because inflationary increases, they don't help us. Existing rolls back, and with emergency levies, that's flat. That's the same dollars regardless. So our only increase in property tax collections will be if we sold a lot of new construction. And one of the things that we are experiencing here the last several years is any of the new significant projects we've seen have had abatements to some extent. So we'll recognize something from them when the project, number one, when the projects are done to start with, but it's a fraction of what, we could see if they were fully taxed. So we're just not seeing revenue increases to support the increasing expenses that we have. I mean, and it's, for us, it's not just that, we're doing so much with salaries and benefits. I mean, you look at our purchase services, some of the things that we just have no control over are escalating at a rate that is more than what our revenue is. And, our foundation for the state funding, it's been frozen for, this is the second year in a row that that's frozen. And it's frozen at the rate that was 2 years ago. So we have had at least 3 years of no increase in our state funding. So our two major revenue sources have very limited growth.
How long ago was it we asked for an income tax? Because I was told by someone that went down, once or twice?
It went down twice. There's been twice since I've been here. It's probably been, let's see, so I'm in my 14th year. It's probably been 10 years since we tried. And then the 2 times we tried, it was fairly significant at those times that it was pretty clear that that wasn't something that they were interested in at the time. But I don't rule that out as something we shouldn't at least consider this time around.
Any other questions? Mike, could you please call roll?
Okay. Hold on a second, I gotta get signed back.
Mine timed out, I guess, because it said you voted out. I abstained, so can I vote again?
I can then,
I
can
deny
undo
it
it.
right then. I was waiting for his explanation again.
Let's see.
I just kept moving mine when he was doing it.
I'll change it as you vote.
Okay.
I can do that, so. All right. Schaffner,
Yep.
Lott,
Yes.
Meininger,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't want that thing. Well, I'm not sure what remove vote will do, so I will mark that you're yes, I'll reflect it accurately in the minutes, and then I'll see if I can't fix it here also. Motion carries. Okay, item C has to do with an anti-vaping lawsuit. I would like to request a motion to approve the contingency fee agreement and authorize McGowan and Marketing Company, LPA, and Francois Group, APLS, to file the appropriate complaint in the appropriate United States District Courts and to advocate on behalf of Sidney City School District.
Do I have a motion?
And this is without a cost to us.
So moved.
Jason,
Second.
Michelle, ask your question.
This was without a cost to the schools.
Correct. This is on a contingency fee basis, and this is very similar to the lawsuit for the opioid case, if you remember that one. So it's kind of along the same lines as that, just it's a different group. But yes, it's contingency fee, and I did run this past our legal counsel, and he read through the stuff, and he saw no reason why we shouldn't at least throw our name in with all the other districts that are participating.
Because that's an important question.
It is a good important question.
Any other questions? Mike, would you please call roll?
Schaffner.
Yep.
Lot.
Yes.
Meininger. Sorry. And Smith.
Yes.
It should be open now.
Michelle, the last time we ran an income tax, because Tiffany has put together a nice spreadsheet for me, I was just trying to find it, was November 5th of 2012. And it failed 46% to 54%.
Okay.
Next item is for unclaimed funds. I'd like to request a motion to authorize the transfer of the attached list of stale dated checks to unclaimed fund 0079008.
Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Linda,
Second.
Michelle? Any questions?
So these are checks that people receive that they haven't cashed?
This is a list of checks that are at least a year old that have not been cashed.
I know a lot of these people.
If there's something we've tried to contact that we haven't heard back from, the thing that is, you know, we put these into something, but that doesn't mean they still can't get to them. It's just a requirement, we need to move them out. But those funds are still available. It's another 5 years on that group until we actually move it back to general fund.
Oh.
So,
And they've all been notified that there's unclaimed?
the list, we've made attempts to get a hold of, let these people know. Some of them we put out, they didn't respond back at all, and it's like, well, okay.
Any other discussion? Mike, would you please call roll?
Meininger,
Yes.
Lot,
Yes.
Schaffner,
Yep.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries. Item E is a couple of donations. I'd like to request a motion to accept the following donations. Classroom chair companions at a value of $214.52 from Julia Franz. A new air compressor for the construction, manufacturing, and engineering program at a value of $2,800 from Kurt Barhorst and Air Handling.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Michelle?
Second.
Jason? Any questions? Thank you for the donations. Mike, would you please call roll?
Lot,
Yes.
Schaffner,
Yep.
Meininger,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries. And the last item for me is a substitute reserve officer. I'd like to request a motion to approve Deputy Mike Wade as a substitute reserve officer for the school security for the 2020-2021 school year at a rate of $18 per hour.
Do I have a motion? Linda,
Second.
Michelle? Any discussion? Mike, would you please call roll?
Meininger,
Yes.
Lot,
Yes.
Schaffner,
Yep.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next up is our superintendent's report.
I'd like to request a motion to approve the personnel items as presented.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Jason?
Yes.
Michelle? Any discussion? Mike, would you please call roll?
Schaffner,
Yep.
Lot,
Yes.
Meininger,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Next, I would like to request a motion to approve the UVCC Board of Education membership plan and the resolution.
Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Linda?
Second.
Jason? You want to explain what this is?
Sure. So on the, if you can see on the one document, it's got the plan laid out. Basically, what happens is, under their current plan, all of their board members would go off at the same time. And with the new superintendent coming on, he felt like that it was not a good idea within a couple of years that all the board members would go off all at the same time and they would have a completely new board. So basically divided them up into three, so they started kind of an every third year, a third of them would go off and then get reappointed after that. So it makes total sense to me.
Any questions? Mike, would you please call roll?
Meininger,
Yes.
Schaffner,
Yep.
Lot,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And the last thing is I request a motion to adopt the policies that we've, this would be the adoption piece of them that we previously had our first reading on.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Jason?
I'll second.
Linda? And these are the same policies we had the first reading last month.
Correct.
Any discussion or questions? Mike, would you please call roll?
Schaffner,
Yep.
Meininger,
Yes.
Lot,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes. Next up would be our legislative report.
I have one, it was just texted to me just a few minutes ago.
Do you have a legislative report?
I do. From Mandy sent this to me just a few minutes ago. There's a Senate voucher plan to be unveiled. Definitely some context needed, calls to the legislature needed, really today and tomorrow. The Ohio Senate is expected to unveil its plan to revise the Ed Choice voucher program at a hearing tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon. It's Senate Bill 89 Conference Committee. The changes would affect both the performance-based and the income-based programs. The plan will replace the eligibility for a performance-based program with entirely new criteria, under which students would qualify if they meet both of the following. At least 20% of the student school district is composed of Title I eligible students. For 3 most recent years, the student's building was ranked in the lowest 20% of buildings according to the performance index ratings for the 2017-18 and 2018-19 school years. And as more years of report card data become available, the plan would eventually use 2 of the 3 most recent school years to determine their eligibility, similar to current law. The plan would qualify 469 buildings as now Ed Choice eligible. A list of those buildings are posted probably in the email that many of you got today. 122 of these buildings received either an overall A, B, or C grade for the 18-19 report card. The plan also adds 150 new buildings to the list which were not previously on the list of 500 eligible buildings from the 18-19 and 2021 eligibility lists. 43 of the new buildings added are not even on the 2021 eligibility list of the 1,227 buildings. This plan would also increase to 250% from the current 200% the poverty threshold for the income-based Ed Choice expansion program, the cost of which is paid for by the state. That one is. The other one is not. The other one is paid for by the local school districts. Students who previously received a voucher and students who are currently eligible remain eligible for the duration of their academic career. So once you get it forever. Including those currently in private, including already those that are already in private schools, and homeschool students. The plan contains no funding to offset the excessive increase in voucher deductions, and the sponsor of the plan is our very own Senator Matt Huffman, who told the Columbus Dispatch that he intends for this proposal to be enacted before the Thanksgiving holiday, meaning that the plan will be passed in the coming days. Immediate calls and contacts need to be made to the legislature today. Below are the points that need to be highlighted. The list of eligible buildings should never include buildings with an overall rating of A, B, or C. Buildings must not be added to the eligibility list that were never on the list. The plan must not increase the performance index percentage to 20% from the 10% currently in law. And we will update everyone as soon as we get more information. But I would highly recommend that everybody call Senator Huffman's office and tell them, no, we don't want this.
Thank you, Mandy. Any other questions on that? Next up will be our UBCC report.
On October 26th, the board members met in regular session. Before we called the meeting to order with roll call, Dr. Luce and Mr. Gibson introduced a new appointed member to the board. Mr. Clint Bostic, representing the Piqua City Schools, was sworn in to serve on the board, filling a vacancy due to a resignation. Dr. Luce began the meeting with her superintendent's report. She stated that the return to school 5 days has gone smoothly. The students are excited to be back all together, and the teachers are thrilled not to be teaching 2 different groups of students. Only 5 parents have complained about returning to the normal 5-day schedule. Improvements have been made to social distancing during lunch and within classrooms. More sanitizing and cleaning are being done. Since August, Dr. Luce mentioned that only 2 staff members and 4 students have tested positive for the COVID virus. The spread of the virus seems to occur within the community and not at school. Dr. Luce is pleased that the current enrollment has only dropped 10 students from last year. Currently, it is 1,001 students. Dr. Luce presented awards to Dr. Robert Allen and Mr. Randy Saylor for their 20 years of service to the UBCC board. Following her report, the board approved the financial report, the approval of local grant funds, tuition reimbursement, board policy revisions, and 7 donations. We also approved the hiring of a technology director and other certified and classified personnel. There was some discussion about obtaining substitutes. Dr. Luce said they have several very reliable subs. The pool of subs is lower this year due to the fear of the COVID virus. In order to keep subs, the board approved an incentive for certificated substitutes at a rate of an additional $200 for every 10 full days for the school year. These days do not have to be consecutive. As a sub reaches 20, 30, 40 days, he or she receives an additional $200. Finally, we adjourned and went into executive session to consider the compensation of a public employee.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions? Next up would be executive session. I know of no reason that we should go into executive session. Anyone else? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Jason, Linda. Any discussion? Mike, would you please call roll?
Shaw.
Yep.
Laniger.
Yes.
Lott.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you all.